everyone, it's Ivan, KidBadger.com, out here with my posse, Tiny and Knuckles. And we're here today to actually kind of talk about some pretty cool history revolving around this rifle, as well as honestly my boys' names. This is a story of ultimately this rifle, my boys' names, and some of our family history. So kind of where does this story start? Well, when I was probably 5 or 6, living out at a family ranch out of Arroyo Grande over in California, and my grandfather John, who pretty important person in my life, kind of a mentor of sorts, and really amazing guy. And he ended up actually giving me this rifle. Still remember it, honestly, like 5 or 6. And there was a little tag on it, like wire tag on there, and it said, I don't remember exactly what it said. I do remember it said it was Ira Jatta's gun. And of course, my mom took it. She's not into guns. She didn't know what to do with it. I think it probably sat in the closet, whatever. Eventually, I took it and started using it some. This is, can I see it for a second? This is a old Winchester 1895 lever action. It's chambered in 30-40 Krag. And it's a pretty cool rifle. As far as the times I've actually used it, not that many. I remember taking it, trying to go hunting, or I guess I was hunting. I was just unsuccessful. And then I also remember taking this out with my cousin Chad, and I don't know if I ever told you guys about this, but I forget where we were, and we were just kind of wandering along, and I had this thing loaded up. We were going through, I think my cousin had like a shotgun or something, and we jumped this like rabbit, like a jackrabbit. Thing was sprinting. I ended up taking this on the run, shot it, 30-40 Krag. All there was like fur floating in the air. There was nothing that I could probably never shoot it again like that. Like totally luck. But this rifle I ended up having, and fast forward a number of years till I was married, and we had firstborn son, on the way, and we were trying to figure out what we wanted to name our son. My grandfather John was an amazing person. Definitely had a huge impact on me. Among other things, he was a Marine. He was with 1-1. He was with Headquarters Company. He was a Jeep ambulance driver during the Second World War over in the island hopping campaigns. Okinawa, Peleliu. He was involved in those campaigns, ended up with a couple Purple Hearts, Bronze Star, Combat V, and huge impact on my life. His full name was John Brewster Loomis. And when we were getting ready to have our first son, I didn't really I wanted to honor him, but at the same time, didn't really want to name my son John, just because it's a common name. Sorry, all the Johns out there. And so this came to mind, and ended up naming my son Jatta, being basically a surname, last name from our family. And so again, Jatta Brewster Loomis. Kind of a paying homage to my grandfather and the important role he played in my life. And at the same time, kind of a tip towards, just greater family. Then fast forward about a year and a half after this guy was born, Jatta, and Ira was what was to be Ira was on the way. And kind of, again, kicking around names, ended up settling on Ira, going back to, I will say, this rifle and Ira Jatta, which we'll get into in a second. But again, just kind of, a family name that held significance. And so Jatta Brewster Loomis, Ira Blake Loomis, middle name after his uncle. And that ultimately is my boys' names, but so far we don't really know much about Ira Jatta, so we'll dip into that. Well, we could jump straight into who Ira Jatta was, the cowboy that he was. I'm going to take a step back in time, a little bit of history. Pioneers of Our Valley by Madge C. Ditmas. Joe Jatta, as he was called by his many friends, was of French-Canadian descent, his parents coming to Connecticut from that part of Canada called Acadia, which Longfellow made the base of his poem Evangeline, because the English in 1755 banished about 4,000 Acadians to the British colonies of what is now the United States. During the Civil War, Joe Jatta went to enlist in the Union Army, and, as he has told me the tale, quote, "The recruiting officer examined me and then barked, 'Join the Army, Hellboy. In 6 months you'll be measured for a wooden suit and be put 6 feet under, for you have consumption.'"
Sick at heart, for my folks had a hard time on their little rocky farm to support their large family. I decided to take what little money I had and buy a railroad ticket to go as far from home as I could travel, so as not to be a care to my parents during the long, slow wait to die that the disease always takes. Buying the tickets and traveling to the end of the railroad, I found a party of covered wagon people starting west to California. Hanging about watching the preparations of the wagoners for the long trip, I often offered to do little things for the men, and so was asked by the wagon captain that ailed me. I told him what the recruiting officer had said and my reasons for leaving my home. He said, "Come along, boy. You will earn your keep helping take care of the stock. And I bet the clean air of the prairies and the Rocky Mountains will cure you."
So I went with the wagon train and in due time arrived in California, working my way from Stockton, where the wagon party disbanded, to San Francisco on a riverboat. I was sitting on a wharf in San Francisco rather discouraged, as I did not feel very well, looking out at sea, thinking that I'd come a long way and still was alive, although the 6 months were up which the army doctor had given me to live. Suddenly I felt the hand on my shoulder and turned to look up into the face of a little, fat German who kindly asked, "What's the matter, boy? You look triest." "I don't know what triest is, sir, but you know, back where I come from, they tell us to go west and grow up with the country. Well, I've come as far west as I can go, unless I could walk on the ocean." To which answer the German said, "Triest is Spanish for sad, and you still have not told me why you are sick." To this I answered, 6 months ago, a recruiting doctor told me I could only live 6 months, as my lungs were gone from consumption. I came away from home because I did not want to add to my parents' hard work the care of a sick son. A kind man gave me grub across the plains here to California for the little work I did carrying for the extra work stock. He gave me what little money he could spare when he left me at Stockton. But here I am, though. I've tried to get work. There is none, for there is none to be had, for here there are too many other strong men here to work. To that he answered, "Up at my rancho near Santa Rosa, my wife needs just such a boy as you are to help her raise ducks, geese, and chickens for the city market. So come along home with me," said my new friend.
Again a stranger bid my friend, for I went home with the old German and found his wife, a roly-poly little woman, who, having no children of her own, mothered every youngster she could. I helped her with the fowls she raised and took care of me as a mother would have done. When I had been about 6 months with my German friends, one day he said to me, "Well, Joe, you don't look much like a dead boy now, and you sure can do a heap of work. I wonder what an army doctor would say now if he saw you. No wooden suit for you, eh? Give your chest a few good hits and let's see if it hurts you." I hit my chest as hard as I could, but felt no pains, as I had before when tapped above my lungs. "Well, Joe, I guess you are all right. Also, you work too hard not to be paid, so from now on you get $1 a day, the same as I pay the other men working here." I really did not want to take pay from anyone who had been so good to me as they had been, but they would not have it any other way. When I had been with my German friends for about a year, I got a soaking wet one day while riding after horses and caught a bad cold that hung on. A friend of my boss was coming south with a band of horses, so they thought the warmer, more southern climate would be better for me. I hated to leave the old couple who had been like parents to me, but that was how I came to San Luis Obispo country in 1862. Some of the horses were for Mr. Branch. I stayed to work for Mr. Branch, who also proved a friend to a young fellow, or rather, the Santa Manulia Rancho, as the valley was then called. I went to live in Tar Spring Canyon. The old adobe was built for me after I had tried living in a tent, and then the bears about drive me loco by coming about my camp and eating everything they could. It was impossible for me to raise pigs, though Mr. Branch had thought it might be because so many of the grizzlies had disappeared during the dry years of 1862 and 64.
Mr. Jatta was a very independent character and was never known to accept favor from anybody unless he could return it in some way. By his thrift and hard work, he left to every one of his 7 living children when he died land enough for them to earn a living from. Correctly, Jatta should be spelled with the French E, that is, Jatte. But when Mr. Jatte filed for his government claim on Arroyo Grande Creek, the land agent thought the name was spelled as pronounced, so he used the A instead of E. And as Mr. Jatta told him, money was darned hard to get a hold of in the 60s, 1860s by the way, so it was easier for me to change the E to an A in the spelling of my name than to have new papers made out at the land office. In Canada, the name is still spelled the French way. For a cousin of Joe Jatta's, a son of his father's brother who went to Western Canada and married an Indian woman, was knighted Sir Louis Jatte in 1902 by the British King for his ability as a land attorney and for the help he had been to the British and Canadian government in settling boundaries and securing railroad right-of-ways. This was printed in the English paper of that year.
As Joe Jatta tried to enlist in the Civil War, so did one of his younger sons, Ira Jatta, try to enlist in the late World War. Ira had spent many months in a Los Angeles hospital for a spinal injury, but had recovered so that he was able to work on a rancho in the Castern part of San Luis Obispo County. When Ira went to the recruiting office at Taft to enlist, the officer in charge, after the examination, said, sadly, instead, in the hard-boiled manner in which Mr. Jatta had been addressed, "Here you are, Jatta, wanting to help your country by fighting for it. When you have an almost broken back and strong, healthy men are using every power they can command to keep out of the army, well, I can drive a team as well as any man. If my spine is bad," answered Ira.
That right there is some of the history behind Joe Jatta, who kind of originally came out in patriarch going way back of our family. Kind of settled that area, San Luis Obispo, Arroyo Grande, Tar Springs Ranch. And with that, one of his children, Ira Jatta, who this rifle actually belonged to. I remember as a child hearing stories about Ira Jatta from my grandfather, John Brewster Loomis, who you were kind of in part named after. And yeah, he told me about him. And he was a cowboy, and not a rich cowboy. He didn't own a horse. He owned his saddle and his rifle, and he would go work on different ranchos. With that, he would basically take his saddle and go use their horses to go work on a ranch. And this was his rifle. He ended up doing a bunch of carving to it all through on the wooden stock, and at some point ended up changing out the factory sight that was here with this rear peep sight. Can basically adjust it for elevation. And I remember my grandfather one time, Ira, he never ended up marrying or anything like that. And I remember my grandpa John one time telling me the story about how there was a woman in town that Ira was pretty sweet on, and something happened and a unruly fellow ended up kind of beating her up, which is uncalled for pretty much at any time, but especially back in the day. And yeah, Ira grabbed this rifle and went into town. He set on killing that man, and man ended up leaving town, skipped town, never to return. But this is his rifle. It's a pretty cool rifle, and ultimately that right there is just kind of the story of the names of my boys and how we came about with it. Well, Ira Jatta was definitely a cowboy. He was also an artist, which I think kind of shines through in all of us, since I know you guys really enjoy drawing. And yeah, he used to do a bunch of drawing. I have Xerox copies of some of his work, some kind of cool sketches that he did from back in the day. But that right there is the history between, or of rather, my boys, Jatta and Ira Jatta's rifle, the old cowboy. But as always, thanks for joining us at kitbadger.com. Look forward to seeing you next time.